Morning, everybody. We'll get started soon.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning, Rabbi.
Okay, we've got the share screen on. The only thing that we didn't do from yesterday's short sif on Hasone Matanos Yichya, this principle from a pasuk in Mishlei, that he who eschews and despises gifts shall live. So we said that in general, you're better off not accepting gifts. And the reason why we said that was, quoting the Sma, is that you become beholden to an individual when you accept the gift, and it affects the relationship such that it denies you, the recipient, the ability to properly confront the gifter if he's done something wrong, and it prevents you from fulfilling that mitzvah of tochacha, of properly reprimanding or rebuking someone because you feel beholden to them. So therefore, that in itself is a reason, and essentially, anytime you accept a gift, you become beholden to the giver, and therefore, it is better not to accept gifts. And we had said that there are certain exceptions to that rule. Certainly, poor people can accept tzedakah. A person who is traveling and doesn't have any other options is allowed to accept hachnasas orchim, lodging from a host, and that's where we got into our discussion. And I don't know whether we did the portion over here from the Imrei Yaakov and Sifkat Nun, Besone Matanos Yechia, he who despises gifts shall live. He says, the derech b'nei adam lios lahut achar hamamon, that most people are drawn after the acquisition of money. Besovram lahachios nafsham benefesh beis, some thinking that this is how they sustain themselves in their household. What King Solomon was saying in Proverbs was that no, to the contrary, if you reject gifts, you'll live. Ki halohut achar matanos sarach lahachnef habrios ve'ena mochichan amaseim haroim sharabahem. And a person who is desirous of or chases down gifts will now become beholden and will have to flatter others and will not rebuke them if they do anything wrong. So I wanted to take a look at the Likutim today, just to finish off this halacha. Matana, a person is better off, it's considered an act of piety, not receiving gifts. Matana, he writes, Dafka mi Yisrael. We're only talking about this preference of not accepting gifts from Jews. Avol minochri, but what about accepting gifts from non-Jews? Ulai lo shayach zeh. perhaps this halacha would not apply. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu viter mamonam liYisrael. So the first argument is, and we have to be careful with this statement because it's not applicable in many instances, but Chazal do say that I have given over the assets of the non-Jews to the Jews. That doesn't mean a carte blanche. It just means that it's a concept that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants Jews to be sustained through the finances of non-Jews. And therefore, there's a different philosophical outlook in the sense that if a non-Jew is trying to give me a gift, I'm supposed to perhaps view this as really Hashem's will, that Hashem designated this individual as a means towards my acquisition of a gift. And therefore, that my attitude is supposed to be, God created this relationship between the non-Jew and myself so that the non-Jew could help sustain me. And therefore, that's one attitude why perhaps there's a different approach to when a non-Jew tries to give me a gift versus when a Jew gives me a gift. V'chein, and an additional point is, lo shayach hatam shel hasma deharei ein Yisrael mitzuvela hochicho. And furthermore, there's no concern that by accepting this gift, I become beholden to him and will therefore refrain from rebuking him, because a Jew does not have a commandment to rebuke a non-Jew. Okay, so therefore there's what's to be argued of perhaps the halacha is slightly different when it comes to accepting gifts from non-Jews. There's in the Mekorot, he brings a kasha from the story of Elisha and Naaman that we mentioned briefly yesterday. We learned about two episodes in the life of the prophet Elisha. One was where he stopped off and would accept hospitality from the Shunammite woman and her husband when they built a guest room for him. But he took the bare minimum of a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp. And when it came to the Assyrian general Naaman, who wanted to provide gifts to Elisha for curing him from his leprosy, Elisha refused his gifts. So the question is, Naaman was a Gentile. Why wouldn't Elisha be willing to accept his gift in this light? So therefore you see that even in certain instances, it's considered an act of piety and to not accept a gift from anyone, especially if the argument is that you don't want to become beholden to someone. I'd rather not become beholden to anyone, neither Jew nor non-Jew. And therefore, while this is really just a different shade of gray, is essentially what I'm saying. Next,
But could I just ask, is there also an issue, like we say about wine, that you just become too close to them if you take gifts from them? Because then you have this sort of closer friendship. I'm surprised they don't raise that as an issue.
Well, there's no objection to maintaining a friendship with a Gentile. The objection is to preventing intermarriage. And wine is the vehicle for making a toast over allowing our families to marry into each other. But a friendship per se, there's no reason not to have a friendship with a non-Jew. And by the way, that's it's an important point, Paul. We sometimes go overboard in our isolation from the non-Jewish world, and it may not be appropriate. It's based on what's been passed down to us from generations past, when relations between Jews and non-Jews were far more tense, and Jews suffered serious anti-Semitic reprisals. I don't know that is true in our generation. Not that anti-Semitism doesn't exist, but it's far different and far less from what it was in past generations.
Thank you.
It is interesting to me that it appears that the Muslim world has the same attitude as the Jewish world about making friends with non-Muslims, and there too there's different shades among different Muslims. Some Muslims say that you can't be friends with any non-Muslim, just like some Jews have that attitude. And other Muslims are much more liberal in that regard, and they interpret the Quran and its writings differently. And so, just an interesting parallel. Okay. V'heicha shekavanas hanosin mishum to'eles atzmo yesh la'ayin im yesh bo chasidus lo lekabel mimenu. Now, what about a scenario where the person who's giving the gift is giving the gift for self-interest? So someone asked the question, I think it was Ron who asked the question yesterday, in my business, I have vendors who give me concert tickets or sports event tickets. He says, in that situation, there may not be any aspect of piety in refraining from accepting their gift, because it's clearly for their interest. They're trying to create more of a quid pro quo so that you'll continue using them as your vendor or as your customer. So therefore, he is equivocating on that respect, and it seems like you can certainly be lenient in that scenario. And then another thing from the Likutim is Harotza Limkor Sefer Torah Kedei Lisa Isha. Now, if a person, normally there's a halacha that you're never supposed to sell. If you personally own a Sefer Torah, you're never allowed to sell it unless it's to get married, because getting married is considered a higher imperative than owning a Sefer Torah. However, it's considered to be a last resort. If the only way that you can pay the bride's dowry is by selling a Sefer Torah, so then you're allowed to do it. But other than that, you never would be allowed to sell a Sefer Torah. So let's say you're faced with the following prospect. You can either sell your prized family heirloom, the Sefer Torah, in order to either get married or marry off your son, or va'asher echad rotza lo ses lo hamos, or you can accept the gift from a wealthy benefactor who would like to help pay for the wedding. So he says, Nira devadai yikabel hamos v'lo yimkor sefer Torah. So in that situation, yes, it's true that there's a one concern on one side of hasone matanos yichya, that if you despise gifts, you'll live. But on the other hand, there's another conflicting imperative, which is you're not really supposed to sell a Sefer Torah if there's any other way out. And therefore, again, this is a perfect example of where you have two conflicting imperatives, and you have to weigh which imperative is more weighty. In this instance, selling the Sefer Torah is less desirable than accepting a gift, and therefore you'd be allowed to accept a gift in that scenario. Okay, next statement of the Likutim. Adam chashuv shahanosein lo mityaker al yedei shehahu mekabel mimenu matana shari lekabel. Finally, if you have a person who is an Adam chashuv, he's a VIP, and by his accepting a gift, he is doing more for the giver than the giver does for the recipient. So, if I don't know, if I met Stephen Harper, and I had some kind of valuable trinket that I wanted to give to him, and he accepted that gift from me, I would probably feel more gratified than he would in his accepting of the gift. Let's say I had a piece of art that I wanted to give to Stephen Harper, and I know that by him hanging it on his wall, I'm going to feel like $1 million, knowing that my piece of art is hanging on the wall in Stephen Harper's house. So in that situation, it's certainly permitted for Stephen Harper, if he was a yid and he was weighing the halacha whether he should accept the gift or not, it's certainly permitted for him to accept the gift, because he's doing it under the recognition that he's actually doing more for the giver than the giver is doing for him. And we have situations like that in our lives all the time, when we recognize that by refusing the gift, we're almost insulting the giver. And we are doing a favor to, many times, especially people who are service providers like physicians, and maybe someone who's a doctor can share a story with us, how you saved a patient's life, or you did something very significant for a patient, and the patient wanted to give you a gift as a result, just to express their gratitude, and you recognize that by accepting the gift, you were actually making the patient feel better than if you had refused the gift. Anyone want to share a story? No? Okay. It doesn't happen in Canada?
It's too long to tell right now.
It's too long of a story. Anyone want to share a quick story about how they accepted a gift because they felt they were doing someone a favor? I can share with you a story, but I'd rather hear from one of you. Okay. So when I was a rabbi in Pennsylvania, there was a Russian family who had recently, this is back in the 90s, they were a Russian family that had recently immigrated to the United States. And I don't even remember, I must have done something nice to them at some point. I don't remember what it was. And the gentleman, the head of the family, gave me a gift before we left. It was a beautiful house that he had built out of matches. In other words, these were not wealthy people. So he bought a few boxes of wooden matchsticks, and he painstakingly glued together all of these matchsticks to make a beautiful little dollhouse, like a little house. And we still have it today. It's on display in our credenza, and on our break front, in our dining room, behind glass, because I recognize the sentiment and the effort that he had put into making this, even though he had nothing to give of financial value, but he was giving me his heart. And I felt that by accepting the gift, I was perhaps doing more for him, with him knowing that I would appreciate the gift and I would have that gift for the rest of my life, looking at it and remembering this gentleman. So therefore I accepted the gift, and I felt that I was in a sense giving to him by accepting his gift. And we all have situations like that in life. And if anyone ever comes over and wants to see my matchbox little house, I'm happy to show it to you. It's a beautiful, beautiful little thing. Anyone want to share a story like that? Okay. If not, we'll go further.
Rabbi, I just have a question, because I think we all have moved into a new place and people bring you housewarming gifts. And it's almost like if you don't accept them, it would be terribly insulting.
Yes. So you have to know. So it's important to take that. That's part of the calculus. There are certain social graces and social standards that exist in our generation that may not have existed in an earlier generation. And if the social standards of our generation are such that this is expected, that the giver brings over something and the recipient accepts it graciously, then that's your obligation, right? Anytime I give you something, Rav Dessler has a beautiful essay at the beginning of Michtav Me'Eliyahu, where he talks about that there's a kinship that is created by giving. The kinship is not created by taking, the kinship is created by giving. What do I mean by that? When I give you something, I immediately relate to you more because I see a portion of myself in you now. I see a portion, by having given you something, I've enriched you, and I see therefore a piece of myself as a part of you. And therefore, because every person loves themselves or feels an affinity to themselves, I now have a greater affinity to you because there's a part of me within you. Okay? And so Rav Dessler's whole thesis is the word ahava, which is love in Hebrew. If you take the two middle words of ahava, what does it spell? Hav, which in Aramaic means giving. Giving engenders love. And we have to recognize that sometimes allowing people to give to us will strengthen a relationship and make that person love me even more. And so that's the flip side of Hasone Matanos Yichya. What is important, however, is that we don't become in any way corrupted by the gift. And we have to recognize that by it really, what's being described in this sif, is certainly the way the Imrei Yaakov was explaining it, is that a person should not get in the habit of accepting gifts, because then you become a taker and not a giver. So if you do find yourself moving to a new place and people give you gifts, make sure you pay it forward. Make sure that throughout your life, you're always giving more than you're receiving, is essentially what the recommendation would be. Not to always reject gifts, but always make sure that for every gift that you do accept, you're giving away 2 other gifts to somebody else.
Is this not also the concept behind giving Mishloach Manot on Purim?
Yeah, Mishloach Manot engenders love, engenders, yeah, absolutely.
Rabbi, I don't have a specific incident, but I'll tell you something very funny that seems to happen repeatedly. Is I'll get typically around Rosh Hashanah, a bottle of wine or box of cookies or whatever, and the non-Jewish patients always bring me kosher items, and my Jewish patients, I would say about 50% give me treif products.
So the non-Jews give you the kosher because they're more sensitive.
Yeah, they go out of their way to make sure, that it's a kosher item. And then I'll have and I don't think it's done on purpose. Like I'm talking about secular people who are giving it, but it's quite ironic.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, let's go on to the next halacha. And we're again talking about the halachas of gift giving. So we're continuing here, but here the purpose, the theme of this halacha is to discuss giving gifts to a minor, and under what conditions does the minor acquire the gift, and under what conditions does the gift that I give to a minor actually halachically belong to the parent and not the child. Hanosein matana lekatan. So if an adult gives a gift to a minor, im yesh bo das, shenosnim lo tzor v'zarko egos v'notlo. So the Gemara says, first of all, there's a test of intellect. We're talking about a boy or a girl under the age of bar bat mitzvah. And the first test that we have to do is, does the child have intellect? What does that mean? Does the child have the ability to discern that there's a difference between an object of no value and an object of value? So the way that the Gemara describes it is that if you give the child a pebble, he throws it away. And if you give the child a nut, he keeps it. And that's sort of a litmus test that indicates that the child knows the difference between things of value and things of no value. So once the child has reached that level of intellect, so then the halacha is b'matana shenasan lo. Let me just make sure I'm reading it correctly. Zacha, rather, I left out the word. Zacha b'matana shenasan lo ve'eno yachol lachzar bo v'litlo mimenu. Then once the gift has been given to the child, it is an unconditional gift, and you're not allowed to withdraw the gift afterwards and tell the child, hey, give that back to me, I changed my mind. In other words, halachically, once the child has reached a certain age of intellect and you say, here, this is yours, you cannot withdraw that gift and say, I was just kidding, give it back. Halachically, then it belongs to the child. Because there's a whole discussion in the poskim, and certainly Maseches Bava Metzia, that goes through extensively this discussion. If a child cannot acquire something from hefker on their own. The Gemara says that if a child finds something that's lost and it's totally hefker, it's totally ownerless, the child technically does not have enough knowledge or enough intellectual prowess or proficiency to be able to acquire that object independently, such that technically, if a child were to pick up an ownerless object and an adult were to take it away from the child, the adult would be within their legal rights. The rabbis stepped in and they said, Mipnei darkei shalom. They said, in order to preserve the peace, we don't allow you to do that. However, technically, if a child picks something up that's ownerless, they don't have the ability to acquire it. But that's only in regard to a child acquiring something that's ownerless independently of any of a giver. But when there's a giver that's brought into that situation, and the giver is an adult with full cognizant abilities, so then, as long as the child has a modicum of intellect, so that he knows the difference between something of value and something of no value, once an adult has given that child a gift, that becomes irrevocably, that belongs now to the child. Okay, and therefore, if you take it away from the child afterwards, so then you're a ganav, you're a gazlan, you're stealing from a little child. So if, for example, grandma or grandpa decides that they want to give a gift to one of their grandchildren, and so they give that child a big rainbow-colored lollipop, one of those really big, swirly lollipops. And all of a sudden, one of the other grandchildren starts to cry. I want that one, right? So if the grandma or grandpa takes that lollipop away from the first child in order to pacify the other child, they're guilty of geneva, because that child has already halachically acquired the lollipop. It's like stealing candy from a baby. I thought you were going to say that, Paul. I set you up. Okay. Anyway, so pachos mizeh. But if the child is younger or more immature in their intellect, such that they still don't have the cognizance to recognize the difference between an object of value and of no value, the child's a toddler, let's say, so lo zachaba, v'yachol lachzor min haTorah. And therefore a person is allowed to withdraw the gift and take away the gift from the child if the child isn't even old enough to know that what I've given him or her is an object of value.
I guess I could say I was a sucker for a joke like that.
That's right. Aval medivrei sofrim yesh misha oser. Right? But rabbinically, there are some who say that even in that scenario where the child is so young that it doesn't have sufficient intellect, it's still usher to take it away from the child, because it could be for a number of reasons. Either because ethically the adult should train themselves to never take anything back once they've given it freely as a gift, or it could be that even a child at a very young age may have a certain modicum of intelligence to say, hey, why did they take it away from me after they gave it to me? Even if the child is not intelligent enough to know that the object is of value, it's a bad educational lesson. Okay, so let's take a look. We'll just start the Imrei Yaakov today. Hanosein matana, if you give a gift to a minor, v'davka bazeh sheyesh das acheres shemaknu lo zacha min haTorah. He says it's only in a scenario where an adult is gifting a minor do we say that once the minor is of a certain modicum of intelligence, that biblically that gift is an unconditional binding gift. Avol b'mitzia de'in bo das acheres makna leka ela mishum darkei shalom. But when it comes, and this is really what I spoke out before, when it comes to an item that a child finds that is ownerless and the child wants to acquire it, technically there's no halacha that the child has the ability to acquire that on his own, because as long as he's not bar mitzvah, halachically he doesn't acquire anything on his own. But it's only the rabbis who stepped in and said, in order to preserve the peace, darkei shalom, we tell you that you can't even take it from a child in that scenario. V'hashach cholek al zeh, the daito degam b'mitzia yesh yad lakatan midoraisa. The Shach disagrees, and he says that even with ownerless items, minors do have the ability to acquire the item biblically, even from Hefker. V'haditnan mitzias cheres shoyte b'katan yesh b'hem gezel mipnei darkei shalom, hainu b'katan shu pachos mitzror v'zorko. Ulam kama achronim hiskimu laharama. So the Shach is of the opinion that when the rabbis discuss in the Mishnah in Maseches Bava Metzia And also in Masechet Gitin, they say that if a child picks something up from an ownerless source, that if I take it away from them, it's only rabbinically prohibited. That's where the child is so young that the child doesn't even know the difference between objects of value and objects of no value. But so you see that there's a machlokus. It's a machlokus between the Ramah and the Shach. The Ramah is the secondary author of the Shulchan Aruch. The Shach is one of the commentaries to the Shulchan Aruch, and sometimes we do find these arguments. But it's different shades of at what point is a child capable of acquiring objects independently. According to the Ramah, until a child is bar mitzvah, they cannot acquire things independently without an adult gifting it to them. And according to the Shach, as long as the child has a modicum of intellect, that they know what the difference between objects of value and of no value are, then they can acquire it even before their bar mitzvah. So certainly one should at least be aware of this machlokas in order to know how to deal with a child from whom you would like to ask them to give you something. Now, this also has applications. Those of us who studied Masechah Sukkah together, we know that if an adult gives a child an esrog, the child acquires the esrog, but the minor does not have the ability to give back halachically the esrog to the adult, which is why we say that at least on the first day of Sukkot, where the Torah says that the esrog must belong to you, make sure that you fulfill your mitzvah of arba minim before you gift your set of arba minim over to the minor. Because by gifting it to the minor, you will not be able to acquire it back as yours, because the child doesn't have the intellectual capacity to gift. He only has the intellectual capacity to receive when an adult gifts it to him. Okay.
Wait, Rabbi, just to clarify that again from my memory, so that means that since the obligation to own doesn't exist after the first day, you can just take it back and use it subsequently, even if it, in quotation marks, still is owned by the child.
Correct.
Is that the difference?
That is the difference. Yes, that is correct. 100%. Okay, so we're going to hold it here for today, and we'll continue this halacha Mirz Hashem tomorrow. We have to discuss a special case of minors who are still dependents on their parents, and that creates a different status in halacha as well.
Or older children who are still dependent on their parents.
And we'll talk about older children also who are dependent on their parents, because that also occupies a different status in halacha. You may think it's a joke, but it's not. You'll see that Mirz Hashem, even after bar mitzvah, if a child is dependent on their parents, does a parent have certain rights of acquisition of their children's property? We'll get to that tomorrow. Take care. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care, gentlemen.